Hello everybody, we're here at El Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain. I'm going to be going in and checking out some of the masterpieces in this museum, so stick around. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe to get notifications on the schedule of the live presentations.
So, all right, so let's just go ahead and get started with the references. And I just want to share two wonderful books that I'm going to be using. I acquired this book in Seville. This book is a restoration and a small account of this wonderful painting that I saw in Seville. And I'm going to be referring to this book just in the context of Velazquez's later paintings, so you can see the evolution. Velazquez's Technique of Genius is an amazing book that I usually refer to. Now, Prado Museum published years ago, many years ago, Velazquez Technique and Evolution, and they published the English version. The information is very similar. As you can see, this is a very, very thick book with a lot of information, and this book is just sort of the watered down version. So it is in English, so you could get that information, especially for those of you that do not speak Spanish. The Velazquez Técnica and Evolución is a book that was published in Spanish. So a lot of the information is unfortunately, documented in Spanish. But I'm using these references to sort of give you an idea. What I did was, and now this is important to share. I've been talking a lot about these techniques here in the channel, and it's really difficult to get an assessment of how these painters work without actually seeing the work in person. And that's one of the reasons that I traveled to Spain. I'm very obsessive about just seeing the work in person, and that's sort of what I'm doing with the live presentations in the context of Spanish painting. I went and saw the work, and I'm just reporting back what I observed, and hopefully we'll get to sort of uncover some of these techniques and learn more about the working processes of Velazquez. So this is so important, and it really it sort of sets the pace also for perhaps a lot of other artists that are sort of going back to the old masters and trying to sort of recover these techniques. Nowadays, we have commercial materials that we could simply buy from the store, but it has left us a little bit in the dark in terms of how we could manipulate our materials to acquire some of these very beautiful effects with our paintings. So, so this is important. So, are we having sound problems? Let's see. So the sound perhaps is we're having a little bit of a sound problem here. So I think what we're gonna do is I'm gonna hopefully resolve the sound issues.
I do apologize for the live presentation,
And sometimes we have technical.
with our sounds. So, and if you could hear me better, do confirm that on the chat, and hopefully we could. I just want to make sure that you guys could hear me okay. And I will edit these videos later on and cut out all the bad sound parts. Um, so let's just see what we could learn today. So in terms of the materials, and just to give you sort of a background, in the first live presentations that I did in the city of Seville, or about the city of Seville. I talked about the civilian clay, how Velazquez began with this clay that was found in the Guadalquivir River, and he started using these grounds, these very dark grounds, to create his early paintings. From there, in the next live presentation on pigments, we studied the red grounds and the red pigments. I went to some stores in Seville, in Madrid as well, and picked up some, bought some pigments, red pigments or red earth pigments. And today, as we're moving into his later period, I'm going to talk about his gray and brown, or I guess tan color grounds. And these are really wonderful examples of some of the grounds colors that Velasquez. What I did is I just took some of the chemical analysis and mixed up these different grounds to sort of show you the array of the different colors that Velasquez would have been using. You have the gray grounds, the lighter gray grounds, the sort of brownish tan color grounds, and of course this is almost like a flesh color ground that he would use. And there's no consensus. I haven't found a consensus about one particular ground that Velasquez used. It seems like he experimented with a lot of these colors. And today we're going to see how even in Las Meninas he's using this sort of ochre brownish color ground. And I mixed sort of a similar color here. This is a color that I used. I used ochre and a little bit of black and lead white, and I applied it. I almost did like a stain or translucent quality here. And we're going to be talking about that, whether Velasquez used a fully opaque ground or he sort of stained this lighter ground underneath. So these are just sort of the questions that I'm interested in, and those are going to come up as we study some of the paintings, specifically Las Meninas. I prepared a video for you guys with a documentation of the chemical analysis, the paint media analysis, excuse me, the pigment analysis that they have found in Las Meninas. Las Meninas is, it's an amazing painting. It is huge. It was painted on linen, hemp linen, which I've talked about here before. It's a wonderful material, and Velasquez seems to have applied a ground composed of lead white, black, organic black, and iron oxides. And when I mean iron oxides, that is a very open term. It could be yellow iron oxides, and I want to show you here. These are considered iron oxides. We have a yellow iron oxide. Then you have the red iron oxides. Okay, which we talked about before. And you also have the brown ochre. And in this case, this is sort of a raw umber color, but some brown ochres are composed of iron oxides as well, and there's a combination. So it could be any of these colors that they find in the ground, or he combined maybe the yellow ochre and the black. So, and here's the black. Let me show you the black here. I have it right here. So these are the kind of colors that Velasquez would have used for his grounds, and specifically for Las Meninas. So he's using an organic black. What does that mean, organic black? So it could mean bone black. The Spaniards used also a lamp black or a vine black. Velasquez used a lot of vine black in his paintings, but in the chemical analysis of El Prado, they find organic black, and it would be classified as vegetable black if it was vine black, but in this case, it's organic. So most likely it could be that it's bone black. So, but that's it could be. There's a whole array. So, and it's difficult to analyze a lot of these pigments. So, the book on Velázquez, Técnica en Evolución, is from the 90s. So the technology there was perhaps not as advanced, and a lot of this information is perhaps not as accurate. So I just want to make that disclaimer. I'm using that information as a point of departure. So these are the colors that he would have used for the grounds. Um, if he's using a gray ground, for example, this is sort of an example of a gray ground. He most likely is mixing a brown ochre or a raw umber with black and white, and you get this sort of neutral gray. You could add more black to get, that sort of cooler tone, or more brown to get, the warmer gray. So um, I've had a lot of you ask me why use black and why use brown, and or even two types of black, and it's to get to control the temperature. So this is important, and as you study Velazquez paintings, especially his later period, you'll see that he's sort of dragging the paint. He takes a brush that is perhaps, and I want to talk about the brushes as well. Now, the brushes are documented by Pacheco in El Arte de la Pintura, which I have it here, always a reference that I use. And Pacheco mentions meloncillo, which is mongoose hair, and he mentions vero, which is the vero. Um, it's it could be classified as a sable or even a polecat. Okay, and cerda, which is the regular bristle brushes. As a matter of fact, these brushes that I get from Spain, Escoda, are just amazing. And he mentions ardilla as well. This is a squirrel hair or ardilla brush, and any of these brushes will give you, a whole array of different textures. So, for example, if you're using a plain weave or a very rough weave, and you're interested in dragging paint, you probably want to use the bristle, okay, or even this polecat hair brush. And by using the brush on the side, you get sort of this dragging effect. And Velasquez is a master at dragging paint. And the reason that I'm mentioning that is because I see a lot of art students nowadays oiling out, and they'll take the oil and they just apply it on the surface, and then they paint into this sort of wet layer. And it seems like Velasquez did not do that much. Seems like he worked in seco, which is taking the paint, the very pasty paint, and just dragging it on the surface and letting that sort of catch on the top, uh, the relief of the fabric, and this creating sort of this optical gray. And you'll see that in the images that I'm going to show you in a little bit. Um, and the reason is I'm creating this context so you could understand, the techniques of Velasquez, especially in his later period. You'll see that in a lot of the chemical analysis, he's using calcite. Okay, and what is calcite? I've had a lot of you ask me about calcite in the chat, and I've talked about it in past live presentations. Calcite is nothing more than marble dust, or some sort of uh, limestone ground down, and made into a powder and mixed with paint, essentially. And there's many different qualities. This is essentially marble dust. It's probably the highest grade of calcium carbonate, and this would have been mixed with the different pigments, and this makes the paint drier. If you have a very wet paint or very oily paint, you apply, you could mix a little bit of calcite into the paint, and this will make the paint very dry, almost like, um, uh, almost, it does resemble modern day paint. I mean, when you buy paint, commercial paint, they put alumina stearate. Most companies today, they put alumina stearate, which is sort of like a gel. And in Spanish, this is called carga, or a filler. And this sort of gives you the ability to make the paint drier, to make the paint more stiff, and to just sort of drag the paint. And it dries very satin. It doesn't dry oily, and this was important for Velazquez to so he could layer more paint on top. Now, Venetian painters developed this technique. They were using dolomite, and I've talked about that in some of the videos from before from Titian, and that's for those of you that are coming by and are watching this live presentation, I invite you to check out the live presentations on Titian. And the reason that I'm doing that is because this is an evolution. These painters were influenced of one, from one painter from one generation to another generation. So the Venetians were dragging paint. They were working in seco and with glazes. And Velazquez, when he is in Madrid, he comes in contact with Rubens, and Rubens uh, guides him and tells him that he should travel to Italy and study the Venetians. And that is documented for those of you. And I'm going to be sharing. Recently, I found a copy of Francisco Pacheco's El Arte de la Pintura online as a PDF. It is in old Spanish. So for a lot of you that speak English and do not have access to a translator, it will be much harder. But for those of you that speak Spanish, there's a PDF available online with the entire book accessible to anyone that wants to download it and read it. And Francisco Pacheco in this book documents that contact that Velazquez had with Rubens. And he even documents his trip, where did he travel to, and the contacts that he made through his travels and the paintings also. So, this is an important point of departure if you're studying Velazquez and his techniques, because Velazquez, studied in Seville under Pacheco and travels to Madrid and becomes a court painter in Madrid. And he would have brought all that culture of civilian painting with him. So that's important, and it's important to study, all the surroundings, all the painters around him, such as Rubens. Now you see a lot of the influence of Rubens in Velázquez's later paintings, and even though he doesn't paint like Rubens, he's using a lot of the strategies, visual strategies, such as a lot of transparency. Velázquez's early paintings have a lot of opacity, and I want to show you here this book in particular that we shared before. In this painting, Santa Rufina, a beautiful painting by Velázquez, and this is a wonderful page here because it illustrates Velázquez's evolution from a very sort of opaque and finish. These are earlier works, and by the time that he gets to Las Meninas, he's working in a very, very loose style with a lot of transparency and a lot of translucency in the work. And this is important to, in the context of Velázquez to study. Now, the materials do not change very much. He's using pretty much the same materials except for the difference on the ground colors. He's using lighter colors later on in life, whereas earlier he's using darker colors. But the way he uses the materials is fundamentally different. And one of those materials that make a fundamental difference is a very well refined linseed oil. And this is a sun refined linseed oil. There's a recipe that I shared with you guys before where Francisco Pacheco recommends that the linseed oil be mixed with alcohol, and in this case is aguardiente, which is sort of an archaic form of alcohol or ethanol, and the oil would have been mixed, to a specific proportion and put in the sun, and the alcohol acts as a solvent, and the oil becomes purified. And this is important because they find a very, very refined oil in Velázquez paintings. His paintings are in great condition. They have not yellowed much with time. And Velázquez seems to have used this oil probably mixed with a type of solvent. And I use this spike oil of lavender, okay? And by mixing these two mediums together, you could thin down the paint to almost a wash consistency, which you're going to see this in Las Meninas. Velázquez is thinning the paint almost like a watercolor consistency, and he's sort of working in passages that are very, very translucent, much like Rubens, and a lot of the Venetian painters, especially painters such as Tintoretto. And it makes sense. Velazquez would have had access to Tintoretto's paintings in the royal collections, such as in also Titian. He decorated El Escorial when you first saw the introduction. You saw some images from El Escorial. El Escorial is a palace that is in the outskirts of Madrid, and I had the opportunity to travel there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place if you have the opportunity to travel there. And they have some of Velazquez's early paintings, and they also have a major painting by Titian, which is the Martyrdom of Saint Matthew, and it it shows Titian's maturity. And Velazquez would have seen this painting, would have been influenced by the technique of Titian and others, such as Veronese and Tintoretto. And he actually travels to Italy and acquires paintings by the Venetians to bring back for the royal collections. So that's important to know. And when you look at the video again, and you'll see that there's a beautiful hall that has Velasquez painting titled Joseph's Coat. And this is a very influential painting, although I'm not going to get into that painting today. But that painting does, and it is documented in this book, and I want to show you here in Velázquez Técnica en Evolución, the painting. Um, we're just going to refer to it briefly. And let's see here. So this is Joseph's coat here, this painting right here. You saw it in the intro. And this is an important painting because this is one of the first paintings that Velasquez is using a different style. And he is using a darker ground. And let me just show you. Let's see if they have some chemical analysis here of the ground. They usually do. Let's see. In either case, it's confirmed that um, it's a ground that is composed of mainly earth colors, and he uses this sort of dragging effect. And you can see it here. I mean, by having the paint sort of just be in a dry state, he just drags the paint and lets that paint just get caught in the the weave of the canvas. And look at how the hat is just so translucent here. Now let's see if we could. There we go. The reproduction is pretty decent, but you can see the translucency of the paint right here. So that means that we have been probably thinning down the paint with oil and or a solvent or a mixture of both, and applying that almost like a watercolor consistency over the reddish dark ground or the reddish mid ground. It probably was a color similar to even this one right here. Let's see, the same color that he probably used for Las Meninas. So probably something similar to that, and he would have stained the canvas, and initially with a quick drawing, and then he would have applied the paint in a very sort of translucent way. So um, and now there are some colors that are not translucent at all. And how would he have made the colors more translucent? Well, by adding calcite to the color, you could essentially make the color a lot more translucent. And this is true for a lot of the ochres. If you were working with ochres and you're having a difficult time, perhaps you don't have access to a burnt sienna or to a raw sienna, or even to a number, you could essentially mix a yellow ochre and a black or a red ochre, mix it with calcite, mostly calcite, and turn it into almost like a translucent color or translucent brown. So it's a trick that he uses constantly, and you're going to see in the chemical analysis, the paint media analysis or the pigment analysis that he's employing calcite just about everywhere. Now I want to tell you a little bit about something that I've been seeing a lot on the internet, and it's the use of a calcite medium that they sell. And it's a putty or something like that that they sell, and they call it Velasquez medium. Now I don't believe that Velasquez use a putty at all. I mean, when you look at these paintings, you go to the museum, you see that they're very thinly painted. They're not textured. Some areas, some lights are textured, but mostly it's just washes in a lot of areas. So the idea of a putty medium and to create textures and I don't I mean in impasto areas perhaps yeah he would have been using a lot more calcite, but lead white in itself, stack process lead white by itself is very thick. If you paint it very thickly, you could get a lot of texture. But I think that the calcite content is mostly to you know uh, create a filler for the paintings and to dilute the colors so they're sort of translucent and they're not as oily essentially. So that is my my opinion on the calcite putty medium. I as you're making paint, and I'm gonna make paint in a little bit. I'm gonna show you some of the colors, and we're gonna put calcite, and you'll see the difference. So, um, but before we do that, I want to just move on and just referring to this book. Another great painting that Velazquez, and these are all paintings that I saw at the Prado Museum. Unfortunately, and I will tell you, I will share my experiences with you. I was not able to take hardly any photography or any photography. There's no photography allowed in El Prado Museum. They have a very strict policy. For the life of me, I still haven't figured out. I mean, you go to Seville and you could take photos in some museums. So you go to Toledo and you could take some photos, but they claim that it's their cultural treasures and they they're not allowed to be photographs. And I, as an artist, wanting to study the works and document the works is very frustrating. I was at the Prado and I've been to El Prado many times, and it's a policy that I don't agree with, and I just don't know why they've taken that position. Specifically, when you go to Vienna or to Italy, and you have even to the Uffizi or even to the Vatican collections, and you could photograph Caravaggio or any other painter at will, as long as you're being respectful and you're not using flash, So this resulted in a sort of a very frustrating experience for me, especially in the context of these live presentations, where I could not document the actual take detailed photography. So, but that's okay. I mean, I saw the work, I took a lot of notes, and that's what I'm sort of sharing here on the channel today. So, El Escorial is a little bit more friendly, but most places in Madrid are not friendly to photographs. And just be aware of that if you're traveling to Spain. I found it the most strict museum, perhaps that I've been to. I'm used to going to the Metropolitan Museum and sitting in the galleries, drawing in the galleries, and taking photos, and it's just a wonderful experience. But unfortunately, that was not the case with El Prado. So, and it is one of a world renowned museum. So, so moving on and talking a little bit about these amazing techniques. This is another wonderful painting, The Forge of Vulcan, and these are paintings that Velasquez executes while he was in Italy, and he is using a lot of the Venetian methods. And this one, I believe, has a sort of a grayish ground. And here you could clearly see that dragging effect. I mean, by taking the dry brush, he's dragging that lead tin yellow right over the surface with perhaps a bristle brush. And he's just on the side of the brush, he's just dragging and that the paint uh, with a paint, excuse me, a brush that is fairly loaded, but perhaps not, just in areas. And that's an effect that gives you this sort of optic. It's almost like a pixelated effect, and I love that about Velasquez. It's a wonderful effect that I've seen in his paintings, and he creates this sort of hazy and um, atmospheric perspective effect, which you see in Titian, but it's probably a lot more pronounced in Velazquez paintings. It's a beautiful, beautiful way of handling paint, and it's secco, mostly secco. I mean, you see the same thing here. He's dragging this painting is painting of Christ, another masterpiece. And even the impasto, you can see that he puts it dry. I mean, the surface is not wet at all. He just takes the dry paint or the very sort of thick dry paint, perhaps with calcite, lead white with calcite. He's just dragging it with perhaps a small brush like this. He's just dragging that paint on it with very quick strokes and just creating that dragging effect. Um, it's not labored. You could just see that that's meant to be sort of um, uh, create an effect of vibration in the eye. And I really love that. It's one of the things that I love about Velazquez, those touches that come afterwards. And they're clearly on top. I mean, these are touches that are, he slayed in these areas underneath, and he clearly overtouch retouches on top of that initial lay-in or that initial painting. And these are peculiar to Velazquez, and the use of very, very thick paint, as you see here. This is another wonderful painting of, let me just give you the title here, Coronation of the Virgin, okay, from, I believe this painting is 1620, could be 1623. Um, and you can see how he's using very, very watered down or thinned out paint in areas to apply glaze, and then he retouches with very thick paint or very opaque paint in other areas. And that is very typical of Flemish painting. You see that in Rubens, and of course Rubens acquired it from the Venetians. So um, a really interesting evolution there of these painters that sort of carry the lineage of Titian. That's important. By the way, for I just launched here in talking about Velazquez, but if you have any questions during this live presentation, you could certainly ask. I'm here to help. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe so you could get the notifications for future live presentations. So um, all right, moving on. So I have prepared a video for you guys about the technique or the pigments employed by Velazquez in Las Meninas. Las Meninas is Velazquez's most important painting and one of the most important paintings in the history of art. It's housed in El Prado Museum. They guard it very well, as I mentioned before. I don't believe it's left Spain probably ever, or it could have been included in exhibitions in the States or elsewhere. But if you're interested in seeing this painting, you will have to travel to Spain. But in the meanwhile, I've put together just a little video for you guys, so you could see just a little bit of the information that they've published. Now, this information I've gathered the notes from this book, Technique of Genius, and also from Técnica en Evolución. And let's just go ahead and take a look at that video so we could check out some of the pigments that Velazquez used in this painting. So here's the wonderful painting. Um, this is an image from Google, and just a beautiful image that you could access um, online. And let's see, we're probably having a little bit of problems with the video. Let's see if the video will start. Um, and I have, yeah, I mean, we're having all sorts of technical problems today, but that's okay. We'll get through it. So maybe we could fast forward the video and take a look at the. So, okay, well, the video refuses to start, but no problem. I will use the book and let's see. So if the video starts, perhaps we'll be able to take a look at that information. But in the meanwhile, so Velasquez employs in this painting orange, or excuse me, a sort of a yellow ochreish ground. It's composed of iron oxide, organic black, and lead white. And this is an important. Um, it's important to take a look at this image and really take it in. I mean, Velasquez. Now, there's a lot of artists that believe that Velazquez painted this in one session, and there's proof that he did not. I mean, there's 3, 4 layers um, employed in this painting in some of the passages, and it's really interesting because the painting is executed in a very loose style. It reminds me a lot of of an impressionist painting. I mean, the impressionists, we have gone to Spain, and we have been influenced by this painting in a lot of other paintings by Velazquez. And one of the things that, as I was studying this painting, and I don't think we're going to be able to see this video, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the images here. And let's see. And I do apologize. I mean, we're having technical problems. Live presentations are not easy. They do require a lot of, expertise. But I do have some images here, and an X-ray of the painting. And this is a wonderful image of this painting. It's a wonderful X-ray, and you can see where Velasquez sort of corrects the image. I mean, the as he's painting, he's um, doing pentimento. What is pentimento? Well, it means it's essentially correcting the image, correcting the drawing, and the painting was the ground was applied in very sort of uneven way. It's a very large painting. That means that he most likely, um, he's just applying this with a palette knife, and it seems like he perhaps um, manipulated the ground with a brush. That's an important detail to note because you see that the painting has a fabric texture, or you don't, if you just use the spatula or the knife, you sort of get rid of the, let me just see here if I have some images. So even in this x-rays here, you can see the texture of the fabric. And if you were to take a knife and just prepare, let's see, if you were to take a knife and just prepare the ground, you could sort of lose the texture of the fabric. So it seems like Velasquez uses the knife initially, and right after that, he sort of goes over that ground with a brush to sort of get back to. And I'm sorry, we're trying to get that image to come up, but we're unfortunately we won't be able to bring that image. But that's okay. We have this. We have some amazing images here. So by applying that ground and just taking the knife and just applying the ground in a circular motion or in arcs. Perhaps Velasquez, is applying the ground in that manner, as Francisco Pacheco also describes. And then with a brush, a large brush, he's probably evening it out, uh, thinning it out, so you could get the weave of the canvas. And it seems like that's a standard procedure. Francisco Pacheco describes it in El Arte de la Pintura, the manner of applying with a knife and then manipulating with a brush. So that's important. Now, I just want to share with you guys some of the, let's see here, some of the chemical analysis and the pigments analysis. And this is an amazing book. I've had some of you ask me, where can I find the book? Where, and unfortunately, it's out of print. Very difficult to find, but I'm sharing some of the information here, and hopefully, you guys could get some, take in some of the information. So, for the Nicolas Pertusato, which is the small boy, or actually, I read that it's not a boy at all. It's a little person, um, and he was a courtesan, and he was hired by the king as a helper, and he, he it's there's a very interesting history to a lot of these characters in this painting. And on Wikipedia, you could find, if you just do a Google search, you could find a lot of information, very interesting information about the painting and about the sitters for this portrait. And let's see, let's see if I have an image here of full image. So it's this character right here. Let me just move this book. This character right here. So the sleeve that he paints, Velazquez paints, is, let's see, I have the chemical analysis. So it has three layers, and the first layer is composed of, and it says here, materia semi-translúcida. That means a translucent, um, there's a translucent layer, and that sort of points out to the idea of an imprimatura. And that's essentially what I did here. So you can see the color here that is sort of matches. It's black, sort of ochre color, and it's sort of this tan color. And that's essentially what I did. I took the, the micro photographs, and I sort of recreated this sort of translucent base of color, which I believe Velasquez used for this painting, because it's not an opaque layer. It seems that he applies a lead white layer underneath, and perhaps with tinted, just slightly tinted, and then on top he applies an imprimatura of calcium carbonate, as we've mentioned before, organic black, and iron oxides, just as I mentioned in the beginning of the live presentation. So really interesting to see how Velasquez used perhaps this system of two layers to create this sort of the idea of depth. And in his early paintings, he's using an opaque imprimatura, as I showed you before in the videos about Seville. And it seems that for Las Meninas, he's using this sort of translucent base of color, which is interesting. Um, and then the second, and right over that, right over this, he applies a layer of lead white, organic black, calcite, and iron oxides, smalt, and vermilion of mercury. And then it's varnished, meaning that it's probably quite literally one layer of paint in just in the area of the arm of the boy. So just go back to that image. And I had a wonderful detail in the video, but unfortunately we can't. You could perhaps find that video, find that image on Google Arts and Culture. If you're there in front of your computer, you could probably do a Google search and find a very high resolution image. Perhaps we could find, let's just get let's get that image on the screen again, on the image of the video, so we could get a nice detailed image of. No, we can't do it. Okay, so 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 in this area, that's what they find in the sleeve. Is very small, but in the Google image, you could get very close, up close to that to the painting, so you could get a nice detail. And so one layer of paint there, and the skirt of Agustina Sarmiento, which is the Menina. By the way, Menina is Las Meninas. The title is it refers to the helpers of the queen, essentially, and the literal translation, if you look it up, is small boy or small girl. But these were they were actual helpers of the queen. So in this area here, in the skirt, they find uh, traces of lead white in the first layer, azurite, calcite, lead tin yellow, and um, iron oxides and organic black. Then there's a second layer that repeats the same sequence: lead white, calcite, azurite, lead tin yellow, iron oxides, and organic black. And then there's a varnish. So two layers there. He was probably overpainting, and probably didn't get enough opacity in the first pass, and then had to retouch it. So really, really important to take that into account. And yeah, so these it's important to take a look at these micro photographs and these chemical analysis and sort of make an assessment of what you're. It's very hard to translate a lot of this information into actual technical terms, but it requires a lot of experience. I mean, as I read some of this information, you could see that the people that write this information are not painters, perhaps, and they don't really understand, uh, the idea of flaring. I mean, there's one instance in which I'm going to tell you in a little bit where they have a hard time translating it, and I'll tell you my opinion about it. So in this area here of La Maria Mari Barbola, which is this woman right here. She was from Austria, and she's a person of a small stature, and she was, employed by the court to take care of the children. And this is a really interesting result here. They find it says here the blue right over the ochre in the dress of Maria Barbola. And it says here materia semi-transparente, which is again an imprimatura of iron oxides with calcium carbonate, black, and in the inferior part. And then in the superior part, they find lead white. And they do make a note difficult to assess the division. And it's probably because Velazquez worked wet into wet and probably dragged that color, and the layers are combined, or perhaps the color on top was translucent, and it's almost seen as one layer of paint. So really interesting, really, really interesting to to take a look at those analysis and see how people are interpreting them. So especially scientists. Um, this is a second layer on top of that, and it's azurite, lead white, calcite, organic black, and iron oxide. So again, you have two layers of paint, and then you have a third layer for the varnish. So it's not, if it was done as an alla prima painting, it's most likely just one layer of paint, and there would be no other layers of paint on top. So there you could clearly see that the painting is layered, perhaps not like a Titian where he's, working with 9, 10 layers, but the painting was probably a lot more direct. But Velasquez does seem um, to be very, very direct painter, very assured of his brushwork and of his, the color that he was applying. And from time to time, he is retouching and recorrecting some of that information that he has just applied. Now, this is for the red of the dress of Nicolas Pertusato, the same boy or a little person right here. Okay, let's see. I'm getting out of the camera here. This area right here, and the first layer is a semi-translucent layer composed of black, okay, organic black, calcium carbonate, and iron oxides. And take a look at. I mean, this is important. They always find calcium carbonate in that first layer, in the translucent layer. And as I mentioned before, why would Velasquez use calcite? Well, he's using organic black and iron oxides. And if they're ochres, iron oxides, they would probably be a little bit opaque. So by putting the calcite, he's probably making them a lot more translucent. He's also giving tooth to the imprimatura, and he's also, uh, you know, uh, controlling the oil, how oily the imprimatura is. So really interesting the use of calcite. And the second layer, they find lead white, iron oxide, black, and traces of smalt. And smalt, as I've shared with you guys before, I have some right here. This is smalt, okay? and this is a blue cobalt glass. And in the 17th century, a lot of artists began using smalt instead of lapis lazuli or azurite, and it, with disastrous results. We talked about that in our explorations of Titian's paintings, and this color will discolor um, badly. So probably they weren't aware of the dangers of smalt, but they do find it everywhere, and this color turns sort of like a brownish color. So um, that happens with a lot of Titian's paintings, and also in some areas of Velazquez. But Velazquez doesn't use it strictly. He mixes it with other pigments, and also with lead white, and that seems to sort of protect the color a little bit. Um, and let's see. And then in the final, there's a third layer on top of that. Um, and this is interesting. The second layer is lead white, iron oxide, and black. So, and this is a red coat. So most likely Velasquez worked with sort of a dead color initially. And its malt is probably to give it a little bit of uh, drying effect. But it's in the third layer, he applies lead white, calcite, vermilion, and red lake, and that is the final color layer. So there you can see how he's using two layers, um, the imprimatura, a base color layer of very, very muted color of lead white, iron oxide, and black, iron oxide, lead white, black, and a little bit of smalt, probably to cool off the black. And then he lets that dry, and then on top he applies a strong color. We've talked about that before with Titian and with other painters, and I don't see it as a formal grisaille, but it could be that Velasquez was working with some sort of underpainting or undercolor. In El Greco technique videos that I've shared with you, I show you how El Greco probably used a black and white, and then he goes in with the lapis lazuli or the azurite right on top. And it's because you're using very expensive colors, the vermilion and the red lake, and you don't want to use all this pigment to cover the ground. So you're probably going to go in with a base color, very muted, and then uh, put a very translucent color on top of that. So that's a technique that keeps coming up, and it's very telling of Velasquez's technique. And I've been doing a lot of research in cross-referencing specifically Titian with Velazquez. And in some of the videos of Titian, you saw that he uses a gesso ground, a light ground, and also a grayish ground. And this is very consistent with what you find in Velazquez's work as well. A grayish light ground with a lot of uh, you know translucency, which will give you depth, and that this becomes his trademark technique. So really interesting to analyze those chemical and pigment analysis. So, and what I want to do now is I want to show you what the idea of calcite. What is calcite? We've talked about this before, but I want to mix some colors, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some linseed oil, and I'm going to take some iron oxides, just like you saw that Velasquez used in Las Meninas. I'm going to mix just a yellow ochre here, and we're going to make this color translucent. So I'm going to recreate some of those mixtures. That's what I want to do. Let's see. So yellow ochre, and remember that I would usually mix these colors in a muller, mold them on a stone to get a solidity. But these are small quantities, and this is a demonstration, so I don't see that is necessary. But if you were to make color on a stone, you could get the right consistency. That's why you would use a stone or a glass muller to get the right consistency. So let's just go ahead and see what happens to colors when you mix calcite. And I'm also going to make a putty medium. Now, what is a putty medium? It's essentially calcium carbonate with, and there are some painters that are using this medium. They put this sort of paste on their palettes, and I guess it's easier. They use it to get textures, but I don't really believe in it. I prefer to just prepare the pigments right with the right amount of calcite, and from there you could uh, adjust the colors. The calcite, if you use a very very thick application of calcite, then you can end up with a glaze that is sort of like an impasto. So that's why I don't. I mean, if you're working with you know very very thick impasto, I guess that's the appropriate way to use sort of a putty medium. But I'm going to teach you how to. And by the way, I want to invite everyone that are that is joining to visit my page ateliersanjuan.org. We just launched some new promotions for um, our workshops coming up in January. I have three new workshops. I have a painting workshop, a drawing workshop, and a portfolio preparation workshop for those of you that are applying for college um, admissions and need a portfolio. I've done that for 18 years. I've had students get into top universities in the states with scholarships. So if you're interested, send me a message. You could send me a message through Facebook or through the website. So, all right. So look at how opaque this color is. And this is, I mean, on the outskirts of this uh, color patch, you have some translucency, but in the center, it's mostly opaque, right? So let's see what happens to this color when you mix calcite into it. So let's see here. Make sure that when you're mixing color that your palette knife is absolutely clean. And I'm just going to mix a little bit of calcite right into here. And as you mix calcite, you need more oil as well because obviously the calcite is going to absorb. The calcite is going to make the colors lighter and a lot more translucent. So the color became, now as I apply the color, if I do this, now you can see right through it, right through the color. It became a lot more translucent, okay? If a lot of you have questions, post your questions. You could answer some of the questions as I work with this. And let's see, let's add more calcite, see what happens. A little bit more oil. The color becomes lighter, drier if you don't add any more oil. But you definitely want to add just a tiny bit more oil because it gets to the point where it's too dry. It will quite literally dry like um, you'll have like a matte spot in your painting and it will not look right. So you want to add just a tiny bit. Let's see here. So there you can see how much more now it resembles almost like a raw sienna. So look at how that just changed the quality of this color. It went from a very very opaque yellow ochre to a raw sienna color, and this is typical of you know, uh, the use of calcite. If you're working with a very, very opaque red ochre, for example. This is the red ochres tend to be very, very opaque. Let's just put a little bit of red ochre here. I've mixed some red ochres before. We did a whole presentation on red ochres grounds, and I want to just show you some neat stuff here. So immediately you see that it's very opaque. And you can manipulate, you could also do this. There's a lot of literature of um, from paint manufacturers that uh, use calcite, calcium carbonate to sort of adulterate the lead white. And in Holland, that lead white was called Ludwig. Okay, that's important. Let's see, I have a question here for Mr. Philip Fabulous. Thank you for coming. Great name. Really like the name. Thank you for coming. I appreciate the visit. Um, it says here, is calcite another term for common chalk? So chalk, very, very, very interesting question. And yes, I'm interested in definitely uh, going to answer this. So chalk is if you log on to Kramer Pigments, for example, that's where I get most of my materials. They sell chalk as a natural material that comes from the north of Europe, perhaps England or France, and it's usually an earth, sort of like um, an earth that is rich in calcium carbonate deposits. Okay, and that it has not been refined. And let me just show you an example here. This is I uh, introduced this material a couple weeks ago. I brought it from Spain. This is called Spanish earth or Spanish white earth. Okay, Blanco de España. And look at the color difference. This is calcite, and this is considered Blanco de España. And I also have a champagne chalk that resembles this material. This has impurities, and the yes, you could get some similar effects, but look how much whiter this is, and this is the reason that calcite is probably superior because you could get more luminosity, um, more refraction of light. So the chalk is essentially a material that it comes from nature that have not been refined, whereas the calcium carbonate is probably washed and refined and ground down. It most likely comes from marble dust. Okay, chemically speaking, they're similar. Now, this is composed of microscopic um, minerals and seashells, and that's why it's white. It has this particular color, and this is just the actual the mineral. So that's the difference between chalk and calcite. So really interesting. And two materials, it's the vocabulary of materials is difficult to understand. A lot of this knowledge they don't teach in art school, unfortunately. You have to read it on blogs or in books or even by the scientists that are posting a lot of this information and are very well versed in the materials of painting. So I've in recent years I've now looked to technical journals, scientific journals to help me sort of navigate um, the confusing terms. Most teachers are not interested in material terminology. um, you could go to a painting class and never paint and just be talking about theory all semester long, unfortunately. So i have another um, I have another question here from Alex. Alex, thank you for coming by. It says here, could you please make a sample of red ochre without calcite for comparison with red ochre sample with calcite? Sure, I could certainly do that. Yeah, let's do that. So let's see here. This is red ochre with without calcite, just oil. Okay. And yes, this is great. This helps. By the way, Alex, Thank you for a lot of your suggestions. And I have found some articles lately that I'm going to be sharing in the future that have actually found some emulsion paintings by Tintoretto. Really interesting. And we for months we've sort of gone back and forth about the idea of emulsions, and I've been doing research. I always do, and I have some really nice articles that I'm going to be sharing in the future. So another subject for another day. So here's the red ochre. Let's I have another question here for from Dark Clown. Dark Clown, thank you for coming by. No, the Blanco de España is not abayalde or lead base. This is a mineral. It's an earth that comes from a region of Spain and is rich in dolomite and other minerals, calcium carbonate. I believe it has magnesium. So no lead in the Blanco de España. Um, let's see. And I bought it from Manuel Riesco. For those of you that are interested in these materials, I have links to some of these stores, and you could certainly log on and order that material. Not easy to get materials from Spain. There's a lot of restrictions. So I have the two red ochres, the same red ochre. Now I'm gonna mix it with calcite in a minute here. Now the calcite, uh, they sell it. Some suppliers sell it with a very fine grind. I like to buy it with a standard grind. If you buy it with a very fine grind, it's sort of like a enamelly. It makes the paint very gummy. I like the standard grind. This one I get from Kramer Pigments. So let's mix here. I'm gonna mix quite a bit just so you can see what happens. You get a very subtle effect, and of course, remember that by I mean, these effects are more pronounced when you're painting. You're using, and that's what I'll do. I'll take my brush and I'll paint with it. I'll do some couple strokes so you can see the difference. So side by side, same red ochre with calcite. And this is interesting because I've seen it all, guys. I mean, I'm constantly looking at other videos too that are being posted, and you see all sorts of crazy videos of people, um, using whatever they find in their kitchen to, to create special mediums. And my whole opinion about that is just keep it simple. Uh, they don't find, fancy stuff in a lot of the paintings. It's just pretty simple materials, really. And when you begin to see what the painters were doing, it's just talent. It's just talent and just ingenuity of the arrangement of materials. Look at how look at what a difference that made. That made it lighter, right? This looks darker. That made that and that's just it makes it more translucent, and it reflects light in a different way. So um, that's essentially, if you ask me about why Velasquez was using this material, well, it's most likely because he was, you know, creating an inner light in his paintings. Look at the difference here. There you can see how much translucent that is, side by side. Now let's go ahead and use a. I'm going to use this brush here. This is a polecat hair brush, which I absolutely love. Polecat hair brushes. They're more resistant than sables. And let's just take a little bit of this color and look at how this behaves in a very different way. Very translucent. And now let's take a little bit of this color side by side. So there you could see the calcite sample with calcite and a sample without calcite side by side. So I didn't mix a medium, a putty medium, or anything like that. I just put a little bit of powder. Now, imagine as you're working and you're probably have, and this is what I do. I mean, I always have these calcite in nearby in my palette, and what I do is I just, take my palette knife and I mix it right into my paint as I'm working, and I just put a few drops of oil, and I change the consistency of the colors. These look like different colors, but they're indeed the same color, right? So um, now you could use that for an imprimatura, whereas before perhaps this is too opaque, right? So take that into account. Now, in terms of Velazquez iron oxides and his brownish colors, let's let's just go ahead and mix these two colors together, just to show you how you could get a brown out of this. So you have there an orange, right? Like an orange color. And let's just prepare a little bit of black too. So with three colors, you could do a lot of wonders here. You have the yellow, the red, an orange, and let's just go ahead. This is what's amazing. I mean, it doesn't seem like Velasquez used a lot of colors. He's a master of color without, having to use all these colors. Um, Today we have a lot of colors, and a lot of students get confused. So they I've seen students start painting classes with 20 colors on their palette, and they probably don't even know how to mix values. So um, at the Pennsylvania Academy, I had some great teachers that taught us uh, limited palettes. The limited palettes was a great tool. It's a great tool to get you to work with tonality at first and value relationship and temperature relationship, and from there you could build on that and begin to key up your colors. So I believe I have another question here. Let's see let's see I have another question from Philip. I guess my question is there a difference in how the different pigments would behave? So yeah, so the chalk does. Well, that's interesting. We could mix a little bit of the chalk here with some of the pigments, and you can see it here live, the difference. Um, I believe now these pigments, the calcite, I know makes it drier. It makes the paint drier. Some chalks, this one I believe makes the paint a little bit more like the calcite. But I have a chalk that is champagne chalk that makes the paint sort of sticky and stringy. So um, it could be. I know that there's some suspicions that Rembrandt used different types of chalk to manipulate his paints, and that's probably the case. Although I believe that I'm a big believer on lead white. I believe lead white has a lot to do with it. So let's just mix. Go ahead and mix here this black, so you can see how Velasquez would have acquired a very very simple brown from the mixture of these colors. Mixing all these colors together, you get this nice brown color. And if you're going to thin that color with chalk, by the way, these are the mixtures that they find in a lot of Velasquez in Las Meninas, this sort of brownish color. The iron oxides and the black and the lead white, which is, it would gray it up a little bit. So, sorry, let's just add a little bit of calcite in there. And I'm making almost like a raw umber color without having raw umber. I mean, if you ever use raw umber and you're frustrated with the drying effects of raw umber, which I mean, sometimes it could dry quite dead. You could use the ochres and that would not happen. So here I'm mixing the calcite, making it really transparent. This would be almost a color for like an imprimatura. Almost feels like a brown ochre without actually having brown ochre by just mixing those colors together. And Velazquez makes a lot of black in his. This is a lot of Spanish painters use black, and it's a color that is constantly being used and suggested by a lot of the treatises from this time period. So there you have a beautiful brown color. And if I want to thin it down with a little bit of oil, just for an imprimatura, for example, let's see here. This color is very, very strong. I'll use another brush. So I'm going to use my bristle brush, and I'm going to take this color, thin it down, and look how transparent that is, almost like an umber color. And when you go to El Prado and you see the texture of the paintings, you see this sort of brushy, and it holds the brushwork quite nicely as well. So that would be probably the use of calcite by Velazquez, just to make the colors a lot more translucent, and you could make it into a putty. Now let's just try that. I'm gonna go ahead and mix a putty, and you'll see the difference. Okay, I know that a lot of you are uh, obsessive with this putty medium. I've had a lot of you ask me, write me messages. What do you think of this putty medium? Or can you make a putty medium? Or I'm trying to make a putty. I'm like, okay, well, what are you trying to do? Why would you need a putty? The first question that you have to ask is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get translucency, opacity? Um, are you trying to get impastos? And I'm not a big believer in mediums because they artists sometimes use mediums in a blind way, meaning that they don't really have an application for. It's almost like buying yourself a $7,000 Mac without having any sort of application for that tool. And it's why do you need that tool? So let's see. I'm gonna switch here. So I'm mixing a little bit of calcite. This is pure calcite with a nice refined oil. By the way, that makes a big difference. The refined oil is important. So I'm going to make this sort of transparent putty medium that they sell it commercially, and a lot of painters are using it. And it's almost like a gel medium. It really, I mean, that's all it really is. I mean, it feels like a gel, like toothpaste, quite literally. So you could even make it with a thicker oil and create sort of an impasto medium. I mean, if you look at the acrylic section of Liquitex, they have oleo gel, or excuse me, textured gels that have acrylic. So it's equivalent. It's the same thing. It's got a little polluted with red here, so my mixture here is a little slobby. I do apologize for that. Got a little polluted, but this is what they're selling in a tube, and they sell this this very thick paste with a dryer, perhaps, or perhaps not, or thick oil, or maybe not a thick oil at all. And they sell this as Velazquez medium. And it could be that he used something similar, but knowing, reading about Pacheco and his practices, there's nothing more than making the pigments and setting out to paint. Not much of, I mean, Velasquez probably didn't even make his paints to begin with, but he probably did adjust his paints as he worked. And the easiest way would probably have been to, here's a putty or like a sort of a gel, and it's somewhat transparent and opaque. And this is with just calcite. And it gives you, it's almost like a white color. So can you paint with this? It doesn't have enough body uh, or enough opacity probably to paint with, although I suppose you could if you really wanted to. I mean, it would dry perfect. So let's see if I mix this into it with any color here. Um, let's let's mix it with a little bit of this red ochre. It gives me texture, and it does have the ability to make the color lighter. It does have a lot of texture, as you can see here, a lot of texture. So the putty medium is, it's something that you could use essentially. But when as I look at this texture, I never saw this anything like this in Velasquez paintings. Even his highlights just seem like lead white, and his lights, excuse me, his shadows are more like this, thinned out, uh, thinned down paint. The paint doesn't have that much texture. Now, I was asked about the chalk, and let's just do the same experiment with the Blanco de España. And this is a type of natural chalk. Let's see what happens and make the same, to see if we have any change in texture here. I have made this paste before with my other, and you could say immediately that it's not pure white, and it's very gritty. You could just hear it. This is mostly like a filler for for grounds. They use this also for gesso. So it gives you like a gel, it's not stringy. Not stringy like I've seen some other, but it feels almost like toothpaste, which makes sense. I mean, they put calcium carbonate in toothpaste, believe it or not. So by experimenting with different types of calcium carbonate and natural chalks, you could probably get another. I have done the experiment of grinding down eggshell and making a calcium carbonate, and that does give you some um, interesting impasto effects. But again, going back to Velazquez and talking about Velazquez, I don't believe Velazquez was, he's not like a painter like Rembrandt where he's working with a lot of impasto. There is some areas where he does do thick areas of impasto here and there, but not generally. So there you can see the difference side by side. Let's put a little color. just to see what happens in terms of color. And it does create, just a little bit of texture, but the calcite creates a lot more texture. It has more body. So yeah, there's a lot of technical information. One of the most important things that I believe, in terms of, and I do have another question. Let's see here, and I appreciate all the wonderful questions. This is a great discourse here. I mean, the exchange of ideas is great. It says here, from, I believe is Benji. Thank you for coming by. I really appreciate the visit. When on a budget, lead white being so expensive to make stringy or long paint, one can mix chalk to different degrees with titanium white, for instance, for something similar. Yeah, I imagine, there's a lot of painters. I know that recently, the idea of painting with lead white, there's a lot of artists that are stressed out because lead white will no longer be available. There's restrictions. I was in Spain and there is no lead white to be found. Um, and it's very sad because, there's such a history and such a rich history of these pigments being used by great masters. And now, artists, I asked some of the local artists there what they were using, and a lot of them are using titanium. It's not the same effect. Um, there's now a lot of you will disagree with me. I've had, um, some hate mail, from about people who do not like lead white. That's okay. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. But if you're doing, this very in-depth painting with, a lot of effects of depth, of of velatura, glazing, translucency, opacity. Titanium white does have its limitations, and it's history, has given us, that proof. I mean, 400, 500 years of, even more, of great paintings, that are in good condition. Um, and, this is a material that is coveted. And the titanium white will take you, so far. Yes, you can manipulate it. I make my own lead white. I know that a lot of you would not dare. It's very dangerous and it's very toxic. It requires, uh, some expertise, um, but it's not impossible to make. It's not, unrealistic to make. And there's, some suppliers that still make it. Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. My opinion about it is, get educated as much as you can about materials, attain, expertise, so you could handle materials in a safe way, and then you could, manufacture your own materials. I manufacture my own materials. Of course, the earth colors I do not, although I have, gathered earth colors and I have made earth colors, washed them, ground them down. I have ball mills, and, there's wonderful, Instagram pages of, uh, artists, gathering, earth colors and making their own earth colors. So, um, a lot of you are making lead white and, are sharing some of the knowledge on YouTube. It's difficult to make. It's not easy. And the most important thing, my, disclaimer for everyone is that it wants to make it, is safety. Safety is the number one concern here. You don't want to get sick. You need a dedicated space. You need cleanliness. You need, you know, uh, just good working methods, and educate yourself about it. How to work. I handle it always wet, so that's my trick, and I've shared some videos about it. So, but I hope you've enjoyed the live presentation. There's a lot of knowledge, to explore yet. We've sort of gone through a whole, evolution here of, how Velazquez used materials from his early days in Seville to, the influences of El Greco and Titian, the light grounds, the gray grounds, as we've mentioned here, and applying these sort of translucent layers of colors over these translucent imprimaduras, and creating very sort of schematic atmospheric paintings. And this is sort of the arsenal of traditional painters. Not a lot of materials to choose from, but the way that they were manipulated, the way that they were, used, and that is probably the legacy, most important legacy that Velasquez uh, left us. I mean, his how he used the materials of his age in innovative ways. Same thing with Rubens, same thing with Titian, and I will continue to explore that. Um, I know that we have modern materials today, but by having more knowledge of the materials that you have access to in the traditional materials, you could also use the materials in creative ways for yourselves. So um, if there's no more questions, I am going to say goodbye now and wish everyone a happy holiday. I want to thank you for coming by, and I want to make a reference to my sales. I have sales on my courses until Friday. I have a 15% coupon. You could log on to ateliersanjuan.org if you're looking for something more structured, uh, one-on-one instruction, demonstrations, and critiques. Do check out those courses there on the page ateliersanjuan.org. That is my online school. I've had students connect from all parts of the world. It's a wonderful community. And yeah, so we're going to continue starting in January. And for those of you that are just looking for introductory courses, something a little bit lighter, although with a lot of information as well. I launched my Rembrandt course. It's a reconstruction of Rembrandt's techniques. It has been very successful in Udemy. You have given it amazing reviews. I want to thank you. And for those of you that are interested, just log on to the description below, find the links, and also my classical drawing courses. There's a lot of information out there. I will continue. I have one more live presentation that focuses on Barcelona and the collections in Barcelona and some of the paintings that I saw in Barcelona. And for those of you that follow Rivera, Giuseppe de Rivera, I'm going to be talking about a beautiful painting of Rivera that I saw in Barcelona, and I'm going to be sharing some beautiful photos. I was able to take some amazing photos in Barcelona, thank God. So I will be sharing those with you guys for the next live presentation. So again, thank you for your wonderful support and your subscribing to my channel. We started with 13 subscribers. We're up to almost 5,000 subscribers, and I'm just so thankful, so grateful for your amazing support. Have a great holiday, everyone. Thank you for joining.